part 5 of Understanding Islam, Unpacking the Dhimma Pact. We're looking at the shadow of jihad. What does it mean to live under the dhimma? How the sword of jihad is always hanging over the head of the dhimma community. The dhimma pact, the pact of surrender, is a communal pact applying to the whole community. And if anyone in the community is considered to have broken the conditions of surrender, the immunity or protection of the whole community is removed. Actually, there are Islamic jurists that say that quite explicitly. If a single dhimmi breaks any of the provisions of the pact, the whole community is liable. Their pact is invalidated. The Pact of Umar itself, you have the Christians, as it were, speaking here, and they say these are the conditions that we set against ourselves and followers of our religion in return for safety and protection. If we break any of these promises that we set out for your benefit against ourselves, then our dhimma, our promise of protection, is broken, and you are allowed to do with us what you're allowed to do with people of defiance and rebellion. That is, you can restart the jihad against us. The Christians are saying that if we step out of line, kill us, and rape our wives, take our children, do what you can do in Sharia law. That allows you to do in jihad. So from the point of view of Islam, the Christians have already agreed to the penalties that are going to be brought down on their heads if they step out of line. It really relieves the perpetrator, the jihadi, of any moral responsibility for his acts when he actually attacks the Christian community. I'm going to give you a number of citations from Islamic sources which explain this principle, because it is very confronting and it's contrary to what people say about the Dhimma Pact, where they say it's a pact of protection and Christians, Jews did very well and so on. I want to give you just source after source that makes this same point. This is from al-Mighinani. He died in 1197. He said, jizya is a substitute for destruction in respect of the infidels, but it is a substitute for destruction with regard to the future, not regard to the past, because infidels are liable to be put to death only in the future in consequence of future war. So what it means is that you pay the jizya to spare your head just for the year ahead. You're not compensating for the past surrender, you're compensating for the future potential jihad, and you have to keep doing that. William Eaton did a survey of the Turkish Empire in 1799, and he said the very words of the formulary given to Christian subjects on their paying the capitation tax, the jizya, import, it means that the sum of money received is taken as compensation for being permitted to win their heads that year. He's speaking about the Greeks and the Serbs and the other peoples that were living under Ottoman rule. This is Abu Yusuf Yaqub from the 8th century. The wali, the governor of a province, is not allowed to exempt any Christian Jew, Magian, Sabaean or Samaritan from paying the tax, and no one can obtain a partial reduction. It's illegal for one to be exempted and another not, because their lives and possessions are spared only on account of the payment of the jizya. This is al-Mawardi, a very well-known Islamic jurist. They make a payment every year, in which case it constitutes an ongoing tribute by which their security is established. It is not permitted to resume the jihad against them as long as they make the payments. If they refuse to make payment, however, the reconciliation ceases. Their security is no longer guaranteed, and war must be waged on them, like any other persons from the enemy camp. So they become enemies. Ibn Qudama said, a protected person who violates his protection agreement, whether by refusing to pay the tribute or to submit to the laws of the community, all those laws I described, makes his person and his goods halal. That means they're fair game to be killed or captured. In Islam, if you say your blood is halal, it means I will not be sinning if I kill you, and I can take everything that's yours. That's halal as well. So not only food is halal, but people's blood can be halal. So the consequence of pact violations, the view that the non-Muslims have stepped out of line, for example, they tried to convert a Muslim, or maybe a Christian boy had a relationship with a Christian girl, or maybe they built a dome on their church without permission, or maybe they sang too loudly and you could hear them singing at a funeral. The consequence of that is jihad, and jihad in Islamic law allows looting. Muhammad said that he is the first prophet who was permitted to take booty. And there's also rape and enslavement. Islamic law allows women taken in war to be raped by their owners. In fact, Islamic law says that if they're married, the act of capture annuls their marriage, so they're divorced by the act of capture. So the Muslim who rapes them is not committing adultery, and they may be enslaved and sold, and this happens to women and children and men perhaps, or that the men might be killed, or they could be put to death. So this is the consequence of the jihad restarting. This has often happened in history, and it's happening today. In 1066, there was a massacre of Jews in Granada, and that was very interesting because what happened was that the Muslim ruler appointed a Jew as the Grand Vizier of Granada. So he appointed a Jew to run the city. But remember, in the Dhimma Pact, a Jew is not supposed to have sovereignty or rule over Muslims. So the Sultan, in appointing a Jew in leadership over Muslims, put the Jewish community at risk of attack because that annulled their protection pact to have a Jew in authority. And that's what was preached in the mosque. It's well documented. And there was a pogrom against the Jews in Granada, just as William the Conqueror was conquering England. And the men were all killed, and women and children, abused and made slaves and everything. Same happened in Damascus in 1860. Under pressure from the European powers, the Ottoman Empire removed the distinction of the dhimma for its citizens and removed the jizya. One of the results of that in the provinces was that the Muslims locally said, well, they're not protected anymore because they're not paying the tax. And this was preached in the mosques in Damascus. There was an Englishman at the time who documented the messages, and it reached a fever pitch when the Muslims went out and killed the men, and the women and children were enslaved and disappeared into the homes of the Bedouins and others. A major international kind of relief campaign was started then, and a number of mission agencies arose out of helping the survivors of the Damascus pogrom against the Christians. So it's quite dangerous actually for the state to give you better rights if you're living under a dhimma, because that makes you vulnerable to attack. You're no longer humiliated and inferior, which is your promise of protection. Also, abduction of women is a major issue. If you live under the threat of legal rape in warfare, that creates a culture of sexual abuse, and it's very common for women and girls from non-Muslim communities to be sexually assaulted. There have been more than 500 Coptic girls abducted and lost to their families since the Arab Spring. England recently identified over 50 rape gangs of Muslim men that have been kidnapping English girls and abusing them, selling them. The average age of the victims is 14 to 15. We had over 70 girls in Sydney, all non-Muslims, who'd been gang raped by Muslim guys. This is a major issue. The vulnerability of women is a huge issue in countries that live under dhimma. Pakistani families know that there's great risks for them as well. And it's a problem for Islam in Western societies, for immigrant communities. It's caused by the dhimma. And people might have said, this isn't Islam. Well, technically speaking, it's against Islam for men to do that. But the Dhimma Pact creates an expectation of this permission, and that creates a culture of abuse and violence. How can we talk about that in Sydney or in London? Well, the only way we can really explain the ideological foundations for this is to talk about this, the Dhimma Pact. But if it's a forbidden, taboo subject, and everyone says, no, it's all sweetness and light, you'll never really understand why these problems exist. But these are the structural, doctrinal issues that underpin these concerns. There was a September 2005 riots in Taiba. This is a predominantly Christian village in the Palestinian territories. The homes and shops were looted. Men were crying Allahu Akbar as they did that. The trigger for that was that a Christian man was reported to have had a relationship with a Muslim girl. That's a pact violation. And as a result, the whole city was ransacked and looted. On March 5, 2011, a mob of over 4,000 Muslims attacked Coptic homes and burnt down an ancient Coptic church in Seoul near Cairo. There have been more than 100 churches burnt down recently by the Muslim Brotherhood, and the trigger in this case was they're building an extension on the church. And the 100 or more attacks on churches in Egypt has been because the Muslim Brotherhood is angry that the Christians did not support them, and they supported General Sisi, and that betrayal is regarded as a breach of their protection, so they're not protected, and they can then, according to the Muslim Brotherhood, lawfully be attacked. And it's interesting, one of the reports that was printed in a newspaper here in Canada said that so thorough was the looting of the churches that even the light switches were taken out of the buildings as part of the destruction of the buildings. So these principles of living under future attack, future war, are very real and Christian communities feel this pressure in a very considerable degree, and it's been, for some communities, 1400 years of fear that they've lived under, and they've been periodic traumatic assaults that have reinforced that fear and kept it alive in their hearts. That's the end of that section.